Hi, my name is Vic Veer. I'm an ENT consultant surgeon that deals mostly with sleep apnea and snoring problems. Now, I want to make a quick video today about some of the signs that you can look for in children who have obstructive sleep apnea. So what I'm going to do is go through those signs and symptoms in children that typically show that, oh look, this child might have obstructive sleep apnea. So you know that you can go to your GP or your ENT surgeon or your paediatrician to go and ask for a sleep study or just some evaluation to see if indeed your child does have obstructive sleep apnea. So the first thing that I think most people know is that if your child snores, there's a good chance that they have a problem with their airway. Snoring is not a normal thing, it's an abnormal thing. And a lot of people don't realise that. They think snoring, is completely usual for children. But it's not quite that usual at all. We know that children who snore but don't have sleep apnea, so completely normal, simple snorer children, have less of a chance of doing well at school than their friends who don't snore at night. And what we'd say is that they don't meet their educational potential. They're cognitively slightly delayed compared to children who don't snore at night. So snoring has a problem, but we can't really classify it properly when it comes to how much of an issue it has to children. Obviously, if you've got obstructive sleep apnea, it causes much more of a problem. But simple snoring can be a sign of obstructive sleep apnea, but simple snoring by itself is not a completely benign thing. You should just have a look at it, see if there's a blocked nose or some other problem. Now, other ways to see if your child is struggling to breathe at night is that they tend to sleep in a very funny position. They tend to sleep in a sort of extended position. It's almost like they're trying to gasp for air. And if you watch them, some children, not very often, but some children do go and have to take a deep breath or really struggle to breathe or wake themselves up in the middle of the night. Because if you're not getting enough oxygen, obviously you're going to have to wake up to try and breathe again. Now, when I said that they sleep in very odd positions, every time you walk into the bedroom, you might see them in a sort of different angle, or we call that helicoptering because they seem to be going spinning round and round on their bed. But they sort of sleep like this, and every time you walk in, they're in a different position. Now, that's just them trying to get into a position where they can actually breathe at night. So that's an important thing. Most children just lie, as normal adults do, they just lie in one position or roll over. There isn't much movement around the bed. I also said at one point that they partly wake up to take a breath. Now that can happen, and it's quite scary for children when they wake up in the middle of the night when they're struggling to breathe. And a lot of people think, the child keeps waking up at night and they have night terrors. But maybe that they're waking up at night, they're really panicking because they've not been able, they struggle to breathe, and they go, they wake up and they come running around looking for mummy and daddy. And actually, it's not that they're having night terrors. It's actually that they are stopping breathing, waking up, gasping for air, and that's what's scaring them. And it's not night terrors, it's actually a sign of obstructive sleep apnea. So some of you know, if you've looked at some of the other videos on my YouTube channel, that there's a hormone called ANP that's released at night, which stops you from going for a wee at night. Now this works very well, except unless you have sleep apnea, because what happens is if you keep waking up, your body is tricked into thinking it's morning, and therefore you start going for a wee, and then suddenly you go back to sleep again, and slowly your bladder fills up, and then adults generally wake up in the middle of the night, go for a wee and go back to bed again. And they think that they're waking up just to empty their bladder, but actually they have sleep apnea, and that's what's filling up their bladder. Now the same thing happens to children. They wake up frequently at night, their bladder starts filling up, and then they need to go to the toilet. There's some children, particularly very young children, have a difficulty in holding on to their urine at night, and they end up wetting the bed. You have to remember that sphincter that holds the bladder in place is not under voluntary control. It's a miracle of our bodies that we can hold an involuntary muscle to stop us from sort of dribbling all day. And all that pressure on a child to learn how to control an involuntary muscle, and then their bladder filling up every night, no wonder they start wetting the bed. Now, a lot of people, when they see that a child is wetting the bed when they're a bit older, they think, maybe some stress or psychological issues. But also think about obstructive sleep apnea. If they're snoring and wetting the bed, just think that they may have a problem with sleep apnea. Now, if you've had not very much sleep, you tend to wake up rather grumpy and very irritable, get angry easily, you do poorly at work. The same thing happens to children. They become very irritable. Sometimes they get hyperactive and start hitting things, and they're labelled as ADHD or just sort of irritable children or not very nice children. In actual fact, they're just tired and they're very, very irritable because they've not had enough sleep. They're sleep deprived, and that's what happens to adults. Adults, we're meant to be able to control ourselves. This is a child. They're not going to be able to control themselves. They haven't got used to the social norms. They're not good at controlling their emotions. So obviously they're going to become hyperactive, hit other children, or all the other things that labels them at school as being a problem or a troubled child. So think about if your child is acting up and they're not doing very well at school, think about the fact that they may have obstructive sleep apnea, particularly if they snore, particularly if they sleep in funny position, all the things I've talked about just a second ago. Now, some children, particularly with those with very big tonsils, they seem to eat very slowly when they have these big tonsils. They seem to pick at their food, they don't eat properly, and you think, oh God, they're not growing because they're not eating properly. But actually, if you look in their mouth, you see huge tonsils, and they just find it very hard to eat, particularly if they've got big adenoids as well. They take a bite, they have to swallow that, they have to take a breath because they can't breathe through their nose because their adenoids are blocking their nose as well. It's very hard for them to eat, and therefore eating becomes a bit of a chore, it becomes difficult, and so no wonder they pick at their food, they don't eat very well. Particularly after having their tonsils and adenoids removed, suddenly they can eat a lot more quickly, and then the parents are looking at them and say, oh, this is a different child, I've never seen them eat so quickly, and they start growing. So a lot of children grow quite a lot after an adenotonsillectomy because suddenly they've got a bit more air, they're not getting sleep apnea, they're not being sleep deprived at night, plus they're able to eat quicker, and therefore they do better at school because they only have a short amount of time at school to eat their lunch and things like that. Now, children who have big adenoids and big tonsils, if you remember, there isn't much of an airway left at the back of their throat. For example, if a normal airway is 100% and they've got huge adenoids and tonsils which bring them down to maybe, say, 95%, even a few percent extra blockage of the back of the throat and they look completely blocked up. So I'm sure a lot of you already know that a lot of us walk around every day, the population walks around with a cold or a virus almost all the time, but it's so mild that we don't notice it. It's a subclinical cold or subclinical viral infection. So we don't even notice it because it only maybe affects us by 1 or 2%, and you might feel maybe slightly under the weather, but not enough to even sort of recognize it. Now, but if you've only got 1 or 2% at the back of your throat to breathe through, and you suddenly lose that with a small viral infection, and your adenoids get a bit bigger, your tonsils get a bit bigger, and you can't breathe properly, these children look like they're constantly, therefore, getting a cold or a flu. Even though we're all getting colds and flus all the time, but we can normally brush away most of them. These children seem to catch every single cold and flu going around, but really they're just being affected by it quicker than or more frequently than other people because they've only got 1 or 2% sort of redundancy in their throat. So these are children that tend to go to GPs a lot, asking for more antibiotics. Oh, he's blocked up again. His nose is dribbling all the time. He's breathing like this. That's why these children are constantly going back to the GP asking for more antibiotics, when really it's just they've got big tonsils and big adenoids. And the question really is, do they have obstructive sleep apnea on top of that? Or are their tonsils and adenoids so big that they need them removed? If you've watched this video and you have a child that sort of sounds like they've got some of these problems, go and see your family doctor, your GP or an ENT surgeon just to look at the back of the throat. Try and work out if they have obstructive sleep apnea. Maybe even do a sleep study to definitively say objectively, look, yes, your child has obstructive sleep apnea. Then we can work out a way to try and help these children get over these problems and no longer have these issues so they can get on with their child and enjoy themselves and grow and mature in the way that we as parents all want them to do. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much. You take care. Bye-bye.